All right, folks, I think we're just about all here, so maybe we can go ahead and get started, and I'll call this to order. Before we move into the roll call, I thought we could have perhaps just a moment of silence in honor of the victims of the killings in Atlanta and Cherokee County, Georgia. So if we could just join in a moment. Thank you all. That was just such a horrific killing, and it's certainly been on my mind, and I'm sure it's been on the mind of many of us. Todd, do we want to go ahead and do the roll call?
Sure, I'll do that. Mary.
I'm here.
Catherine.
Present.
Annette.
Here.
Chantel. Not here. Ernest.
Here.
Jessica.
Here.
Wolfgang.
Here.
Sue.
Here.
Tabia.
Here.
Andy.
Here.
Alex. Oh, and I'll just let you know, Alex is not going to join us this evening. I just got an email. And Lindell.
Here.
And I believe that Chantel was going to be potentially driving or traveling and was going to try to join when it was possible. So hopefully she'll be able to join for some part of the meeting. So if we can all join in reciting our mission together, act as a strong advocate for justice and equal opportunity,
providing citywide leadership and guidance in the area of civil rights.
Thank you all. Next up, we have matters by the public. Is there, I don't know whether we have any.
We have one attendee.
If
is in the audience, and our other attendee is currently a panelist. So that's Emma from TSA. But, Molly, if you have any inclination to speak, you just raise your hand if you want to, and if not, that's fine too.
And we will have another opportunity for the public to comment later on in the meeting if no one is called to speak now. All right, well, I think then I will skip the commission response to matters by the public since we didn't have matters by the public. Next up, we've got the minutes to be approved. First up, we've got the minutes of the January 21st, 2021 HRC regular meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Great, thank you. And I realize that maybe Martha's rules doesn't require us to have a motion and a second for approving minutes. So how about?
Actually, Robert's rules doesn't either.
Oh, all right, well, that is so good to know. Oh, Chantel, thanks. I mean, glad you were able to join. All right, well, can we have then a thumbs up for approving the minutes of January 21st, 2021? Or not thumbs up, thumbs up?
Record thumbs up, okay.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Okay, right.
May I interrupt and just for the sake of like the record, and since there may be people who are visually impaired, maybe we could do it orally as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So can we, I guess, can we hear all the ayes for approval of the minutes of January 21st?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, great. And we also have the minutes of the February 27th annual retreat.
and make a motion to approve the minutes.
Great. All eyes, please. Fingers and oral.
I,
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any nays? Great. Okay, moving into business matters. We've got the first thing up, the Office of Human Rights Manager / Director hiring. Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on?
Sure. And first, I want to give props to Jessica for calling it to our attention that it was posted. I think you saw it on LinkedIn, and then it was also on the city website. So that was helpful to know because I didn't know about that before you told me. And so the position is posted, but from what I could glean from just looking at the position description, it doesn't look like any of the recommendations that the commission had originally proposed, in which we tried to get in front of council, and I believe we've emailed to council. None of those seem to be incorporated. And so I've attached to the agenda packet the most recent draft of those revisions, which includes some additions that Mary put in there that included the new recommendations that were included in the ordinance for the qualifications of a director. And just to also be clear, they're still advertising it as an OHR manager position, not as a director position, which has implications not only for compensation, but also just in terms of how that position is viewed in authority within the city. So I'll leave it at that, I think. And just maybe also just to maybe state this publicly so you all know, like I am not applying. It's just so you know, I have no intention of applying. I don't think that is the right position for me to be in the organization. And I want to be supportive of somebody who is very qualified to do it, and hopefully somebody who can identify by lived experience with some of the things that we work on a daily basis. So that's all I have to say about that.
So before we kind of move into a discussion of this, I wanted to share one other little bit of information, and that is that the salary that has been set is $73,000 to $81,000 as the top. By contrast, there are two other positions being advertised that one might think of as appealing to some of the same population. The city attorney's position is being advertised with a range of $150,000 to $176,000. And the executive director of the Police Civilian Review Board was advertised with a range of $89,000 to $137,000. So we can see kind of where this salary range falls in comparison to some other things. And so now I kind of throw the floor open for discussion by the commissioners.
I mean, it's posted, but is it possible to bring this up to council and make edits to the existing post, or is that not possible?
and I'm curious as to how much input anybody from the commission had to this, and how much input normally gets into salary setting for advertised positions.
I would think that all we could do now is ask that this position be withdrawn and provide guidance for what we think it should really have, right?
And we could certainly do that. The city council went out of its way to impose additional requirements and experience. And I'm just not sure that the stated salary reflects those additional requirements, at least insofar as it's compared to other positions that are being advertised for. I'm sorry, I can't see everybody with my current setup. So if you're raising your hand, feel free to also just, kind of speak up and let me know if you want to speak.
The other issue is that this position theoretically down the road will oversee more people, more actual people that report to that position than the executive director of the CRB.
One thing I should also note that soon after we saw that it had been posted, I did send an email to Chip Boyles and copied Mary on it with the same revised position description that's attached to the agenda packet, and suggested that the commission probably would be interested in having some input on it and some dialogue. I did not get a response to that, but I made that initial reach out. So
Thank you.
Like, this might be kind of a stupid question, but I was really hoping that we all get together tonight and we out here like, oh yeah, this was a mistake. This was an oversight. It seems a bit ludicrous to me that this is actually this wasn't an oversight, right? Like, this is how they're considering this position to be going forward.
Mhm.
We don't have any reason to believe it was an oversight at this point. I mean, I think it's certainly worth engaging in further discussion, and I think Todd reaching out was useful, and we could do some other advocacy, but I would love to kind of hear from the commission what action you all think is called for.
Well, I definitely think that we need to object to this, to voice our concerns about one, council put a little more work on the commission with the interesting things they threw at us with the ordinance, and yeah, whatever we can do to say this is not right. I think we should do. However, how we do that, obviously the chair speaks for the commission.
But one sort of question I would have is who in the city, like, is it coming from the city manager's office? I'm just curious, who is the actual person who wrote this? And, is this something, somebody we'd have access to kind of understand where this originated from? Because it does feel like it's sort of based on something completely outside of whatever we recommended. So, is it from the city manager? Is there an HR person in the city? It would be really helpful to know who's generating this in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
India, that's a really good point. I want to do a little more research. I'm curious because I know that Chip's initial response when I had inquired about the time frame for hiring was that he wanted to hire an HR director first, because I know that the HR director that was previously there was transitioning out, although her picture is still on the city's website. So it's really confusing sometimes what the status of certain employees is, but that was a surprise to me too, because I believe the HR director would sort of be the one to sort of update the city's job postings and so forth, obviously with the authorization of the city manager. But yeah, I can look into getting some clarification on that. I don't know what kind of response I'll get, but I'm certainly happy to ask.
I mean, I would be inclined to think that we should put something in writing and then ask for a meeting. I mean, just the choice, for example, you pointed out, Todd, of the word manager versus director, I think is a significant difference in word choice. And
the fact that the CRB is getting an executive director and we're just having a director.
We're not having a director, we're having a manager.
Well,
Right.
That's true. We're having a manager, I do think maybe we should sit down with HR and the city manager and find out where this all came from.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a question, or I'm assuming that the manager correlates with a certain pay band, and the director is a different one. So it feels as though maybe that's some of what was intrinsically in it. Our recommendations were obviously weren't for a manager, they were for a director of the Office of Human Rights. So we didn't even really, I'm just thinking back to like, did we have concrete discussions, right, about pay bands? Which I don't think we did. We just made the assumption that they would hire within the director pay band because we wanted a director for the Office of Human Rights. And I personally, I don't know, like I think Todd needs someone, right? But that we shouldn't have to be put into a corner where this was our only option. And so the Office of Human Rights is again being like understaffed, and we're having the same issues cycle in and out. And then the efficacy of this office and the board does not seem to be playing out the way that the city would like it to be. And then it just feels like it's creating a system where Charlottesville doesn't do human rights work very well. And it's directly like connected to the investment that it puts into it. But they're hoping that they're going to get something right amazing and with little investment, which is just ridiculous. So I don't know, I guess all we can do is write a letter at this point. I don't know if we're trying to ask them to yank the position. That doesn't necessarily feel right to me either, but I'm wondering if there's something else that Chip can do while he is a manager for the city and really uplifting that position to be what it should originally have been as a director, and the money that should be invested in the office.
Chantel, that was really well said. And I look at this, the difference in the top, sort of the range is between the manager of the Office of Human Rights and the director of the CRB is more than $55,000. And I don't understand that. I don't approve of it, but I also don't understand it. And I would think it would be very useful to have somebody explain how those different salary ranges were selected and what that is based on.
I'm also willing to check with the VAHR and see what, if I can get any information from the heads of the agency that I'm aware of. I'm more than willing to do that. If they'll release any information, I'll just call Raul.
But I think we should strongly, I don't know the protocol as far as like pulling it, but I feel like it needs to be the appropriate job, like the job description.
Sure.
And it needs to be the right thing. So if it means pulling it but we're asking to please replace with director, like that's what I would like to see.
I think in addition to sending a letter, we should call the city manager's office and do some other advocacy too, because if you've already emailed him, Todd, and didn't get a response, I imagine, how long ago was that? Like 2 weeks or?
Yeah, well, as soon as Jessica let me know that it happened. So yeah, it's been a little while.
Yeah, so I would suggest that we call or even go to his office and deliver the letter.
I think we can, I can work with Todd to put something together to express the view of the commission. I don't, I know we pushed very hard for them to get this ad out, but I do think, leaving it this way is not going to be competitive, and it's not going to attract as many, qualified candidates as we probably would like to see.
And I know I try to always give people the benefit of the doubt. And so I don't want to speak to people's intention on this, but I would like to get clarity on how like Mary, you've met with city council to say we need a director in this position. Like, I don't understand how it went from our constant recommendations in all of our documents to city council, director. I'd like clarity on that.
I agree. I think we need clarity. I think we need to find out what is going, who put that out so we know. It's very concerning to me that the way this position is being advertised in the climate that we're in, we definitely need a Human Rights Commission director right now. Someone in that position, because I'm really concerned that with climate and things we're asking the city to do and to look at, that we need someone strong in that position. And I agree. I don't think we will get someone very strong with the pay scale that they have.
The other input is there is, and there was, I don't know if they've made any changes to it, but there was a schematic of the whole structure of the city government. And there was, I think in that scheme, it did show a manager instead of a director, even though we've been pushing forever for a director. So it would be maybe helpful for somebody to get a hold of that structure of city government right now and see if they made any changes, how they're looking at various entities within the city. I'm sure it's easily available.
Just to add to that, back when Dr. Richardson changed the organizational structure, I think it was July of 2019, I suppose, when sent out a diagram. The Office of Human Rights actually wasn't on the diagram.
I know, yeah.
And so we had to kind of ask, right, like, where does this put us? And at the time, the response was, well, we're going to put you with the Department of Human Services. And so it was interesting after Charlene departed and there was more staff changing. It wasn't even clear where we fell into the organizational structure, and I wasn't even, for a little while, I wasn't sure who my supervisor was, to be very candid about it. Had to ask, which is kind of strange, but in any case, yeah, I think that's still unclear. So I will certainly ask about, is there an organizational structure diagram?
Mm-hmm.
I would like to officially welcome Jeanette's partner there because because he or she is a very
beautiful.
Yes. I think that I hear consensus that we should express our concerns in very serious ways, both by putting something in writing and then by requesting a meeting with the city manager. And if that does not realize success, I would suggest the next move would then be to approach city council again, but want to make sure that I'm accurately kind of stating the view of the commission.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, Todd and I can work together on that. Okay, great. And that leads us to the Todd report, Office of Human Rights Staff report.
Just scroll down to my own report. I'm going to be brief. As you noticed, there's no colorful chart on this one, mostly because I have not had time to do data entry. I've been focused on providing service, which is good, right? That's the first and foremost that we do. We write it down always, but it's not in the computer yet. So working on that. Just to kind of go down, you can see that there's 2 active investigations. One is not really in the investigative mode. It's in the sort of final conciliation part of it. It's been a little bit challenging to get a response from the complainant because we're trying to find legal counsel that they can consult before they make a decision. And it's been really hard to do that. So in any case, I keep following up with him on a regular basis to try to figure out what the status of that is. I'll keep doing that because we want to figure it out and make sure that the complainant gets a satisfactory response. So the other things I'm doing are fact-finding things. I'm going to point down to case, what is it? 2021-2, which was a housing discrimination allegation on the basis of source of funds. And there's exemptions in state law that basically if a landlord owns fewer than 5 or has an investment in fewer or 5 rental units in the state of Virginia, they're exempt from the source of funds protection. So so the complaint itself has to be dismissed. And one of the things I haven't, this is sort of on the burner right now because I haven't finished typing the email. But I want to find out if we can still use our mediation services, which I'm in the process of getting that renewed with procurement. I think we have a mediator lined up, and I'm learning about all the procurement stuff because I never had to do that before, but I think we're there. But I want to find out if we can use mediation to resolve and get some of the remedies that the complainant had asked for. Would we be able to have been able to investigate and come up with a determination, which we can't now. So I have to find out if that's within the scope of the ordinance. It's a little fuzzy in the ordinance because we've never tried that before, but let's see what we can creatively do with that. Other things to note, the website now has the new ordinance up, so the public can access the new ordinance, the new amended ordinance. I updated our main intake and complaint form so that the public now has access to a complaint form that has all the protected classes on it, which it did not before. I'm working on trying to get an online intake form. There's some confidentiality problems with that, but hopefully, because I've gotten a few requests, like I frequently get folks who want to file a complaint, and then I either like go hand deliver a form or figure out how to mail it to them or some kind of way, like fill the form out as they talk to me over the phone. But people sometimes ask, can I just fill it out online? So I'm trying to get to that point, but there's some technical things we're trying to figure out there. So just bringing that up. And I think that's mostly what I wanted to bring up. Under the affordable housing thing, there was a guidance document that the Virginia Real Estate Board, which is under the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation, which is where the Fair Housing Office is housed, they did a guidance document about source of funds protections, which actually sort of amplifies and clarifies what's protected. And so there's some really important clarifications in there. And so on behalf of the office, I was able to put a comment in during the public comment period. It was great because people from LAJC, CVLAS, Pima Housing Alliance, Home, Virginia Poverty Law Center. There was a whole bunch of great, really specific, well thought out comments in opposition or in support of the guidance document, which was helpful because there were a lot of real estate interests opposing the guidance document as it was written. So I'm hopeful that it gets some traction and gets passed into being official, because some of the stipulations in there will have a huge impact on how we can enforce source of funds protections locally. So that's pretty much all I wanted to bring up in addition to what's already on the little paper report there. But if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Todd. Any questions for Todd? Next up, we have the chair update, and I'll be brief because I think most of my update maybe will fall into another category. But just to let you all know that I did attend the city council meeting immediately after our retreat to express concern about the ordinance. There were the city council members talked about it briefly. We didn't really, get any action, but we did express our concerns there. And then I also we'll talk a whole lot more in just a minute about the housing committee that met yesterday to talk about a variety of kind of housing issues. And we spent quite a bit of time on the issue of representation for tenants and eviction proceedings. And in that meeting, the public mentioned that there was actually a budget work meeting last night, and that it was an important, that it would be important to kind of note our interest in this issue as they think about the the budget. And so I did attend the work group meeting last night and spoke about our interest in having the city create a program whereby all tenants in eviction proceedings would be entitled to a lawyer. I think there's a lot of work that would need to be done to, get the data to, sort of make that case really well. And I'm hoping we'll be able to talk about that when we, get to the housing committee update in, I think that may actually be next. And so that's I'll leave that as the chair update, and then we can move into the housing committee update because we have a presentation there. Any questions? Yep.
So what do y'all think? Is that just like you lodged our concerns and then there's no other follow-up, or?
Well, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Is how much of our energy and capital do we want to use about the ordinance versus the director position versus, getting lawyers for tenants and, right. So I'd love to hear from folks kind of what they think appropriate follow-up is on that. And I think, Catherine, you have your hand up. Or you...
Well, just in response to that, to me, if we don't have a director, right, who has the breadth and depth of skills that we are asking for, the ability to do all the rest of our work is going to be hampered. And so that seems kind of critical, and it seems like a real, maybe it's an oversight, maybe they weren't thinking it through, maybe this got handled at a lower staff level and whatever, but if we I think we need to push hard on this.
I agree. I understood that question to be about whether we should follow up on the revisions to the ordinance. Was that
Yeah.
the suggestion?
We could do both if we do have an opportunity to speak with the city manager or with council again, bring up that issue that we hadn't heard back a response.
Other thoughts about that?
I have my hand raised.
I'm so sorry, Sue. I really can only see like a few people at a time the way my computer is currently set up.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
I don't think we should worry about concentrating on one thing or another. Every one of the issues that we have are important issues and need to be dealt with. The ordinance issue needs to be dealt with. The director's issue needs to be dealt with. And I don't think we need to worry ourselves about, which is more important. They are both important, and letting council know that they've laid work on us, that we need a director to help us do that. Todd can't do everything, although he's an amazing thing. I don't know how he does what he does, but I don't think I cannot choose to concentrate on one or the other. I think it is incumbent on us to just keep hammering away at the issues that we have.
Wolfgang, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I was applauding Todd.
Oh, yeah. Okay, fair enough.
Is there much to follow up on with the ordinance, though? I thought we'd sort of made our point that the process was terrible, and that we can make the needed revisions because we're going to have to be putting in another set of changes anyway. And so I guess I'm not quite sure what the real follow-up is, because it's done now, right?
I thought we were asking them to reconsider, to revote on it now, but I forgot, as you mentioned just now, that we'll have another opportunity to make those changes. But at one point I thought we were going to say to them, don't accept, redo the vote that you accepted and consider the original piece that we proposed for vote before the individual changes happen.
Yes.
And part of that original is the director's position. We got a whole section in there, and somebody's made some changes. I don't know where that change came from.
Well, the council added its own requirements for additional experience or skills, right? So that is something that council itself, I mean, that's language that they chose and adopted without our input, but they certainly added that.
From a timing perspective, just thinking about how long it will take to get the new changes into the ordinance for what they call substantial equivalence with federal housing law for the FAP agreement. Like that's going to take a little while. So maybe part of what you're thinking about is like, how hard do you push for them to revert back to the originally proposed amendments? If that is, if you feel like it's necessary from an immediacy perspective, then you might want to do that, because I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get all of the FAP amendments into the ordinance and then reviewed with the city attorney's office and all that stuff. That's a lot longer process. So just putting that out there.
I'm not sure that any of the new requirements that the council added to the ordinance without our input go into effect immediately, though. So there is, in that sense, there is time, right? There's this requirement that we produce a research, project every 2 years, but that doesn't go into effect immediately. And the change in the number of members doesn't go into effect immediately either. So there would be that opportunity to present, suggested revisions along with the language needed for FAP before any of those kick in.
I guess I feel like the changes aren't urgent, as you say. And it feels it feels unlikely to me that they would actually vote to, it just doesn't feel worth our energy going to that. We made our point that it was, and you made it quite forcefully, that it was just a terrible process.
My own inclination would be to go back to the council with all the revisions that we want at one time, and that it seemed to me kind of more likely we would just be able to make that happen. But I mean, that would be my own inclination at this point.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'm okay with it too.
All right, I think that we promised our presenter this evening that we would get her in at a reasonable time to present. So if we can move on to the Housing Committee update. Tell her to be, when are you going to sort of present, summarize the committee and maybe introduce our panelist or presenter?
Okay, I will. So the Housing Subcommittee met yesterday to discuss creating eviction prevention policy and the right to counsel with Mary, Chantel, and myself. The committee will be co-chaired by Chantel and me. And Elizabeth Stark and Emma Goler from the Charlottesville DSA attended and presented their findings from court watching between July 14th, 2020 through March 9th, 2021. And the DSA agreed to attend tonight's meeting to share that data with the HRC. In our meeting, we discussed eviction prevention programs to accompany policy and how to create infrastructure to inform people if the resources became available, if a lawyer is needed for eviction. We also talked about collaboration with other organizations who are doing similar work and how we can work with them to create programs to help. So tonight, I think we have we have Emma Goller from Seville DSA to share that data.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tovia. So I think at the meeting yesterday, we discussed that I could just sort of go over the same presentation that I gave to the housing subcommittee, if that's still all right. It's a pretty short slideshow that I'm gonna go ahead and share right now. And can you all see that? Okay, great. So yeah, just like Tovia mentioned, we were invited to talk a little bit about some of the things that we found from observing eviction court since July at the meeting yesterday. And I can go over that a little bit. So during the outbreak of the pandemic, for a while, the courts in Virginia were closed. And as they started reopening, I think a lot of us were nervous that folks who had lost income due to COVID would be especially vulnerable. And so we started trying to think of ways that we could work on eviction prevention. And one of the ideas we had was court observation. We haven't observed every case. We don't have a complete data set for this time period. We did observe 142 hearings in Charlottesville, in addition to the ones that we observed in Albemarle in this time period. And we really see this as part of the anti-eviction work that we've been doing in DSA. So we're not necessarily going in there, just as a blank slate collecting data. We also have volunteers who are outside of the courtroom trying to let tenants know about their rights. We get data from the courts ahead of time and go ahead and canvass and call tenants to let them know about their rights ahead of time. So we're really we're acting to try and prevent eviction. So there's that disclaimer there. And I'll go over some of the findings that we have. So in the cases that we observed, we did notice that nearly half of tenants did not show up to their court dates. So this is the first court date that you have to attend if you're facing eviction. And we found that tenants who were not present were much more likely to be evicted. And that's even with all of the COVID protections that were in place for tenants. So including the moratorium from the Center for Disease Control and the Virginia state protections for tenants. We also found that from sort of demographic observation, we found that more than half of the tenants in court were Black and about a third were white. We have some more demographic observations. Unfortunately, because of the nature of court observation, you're not allowed to speak in the courtroom. We can't really talk to tenants. So this data isn't from self-attested statements or anything like that. This is sort of an assumption or a presumption that we have to make when we're observing. But we find it important to collect that information anyway. And then lastly, just we found that legal representation made a humongous difference. So go into that in a little bit of more detail here. So right, so as I mentioned, for nearly half, so 46% or so of cases, only the landlord was present. That means the tenant didn't show up to their case. There's a number of reasons for this that maybe we could discuss later. But the results when that was the case, when the tenant was not present, were an eviction judgment was granted 45% of the time. There were also continuances and dismissals granted. Most often this was either because the landlord hadn't filled out the correct paperwork with the various restrictions in place due to COVID. So for example, landlords had to provide an affidavit attesting that they knew the provisions of the CARES Act and how that applied to tenants. So when landlords didn't have those documents, that was most often the cases that were continued or dismissed. But, and yeah, and here's just a snapshot of the race and gender data that we've been able to collect. And as you can see, more than half of the tenants who are present in court when we're observing are Black, about a third are white. You know, we can talk about analysis for this too, but I think to some extent, like these numbers are tell a story themselves. And then, so the issue of legal representation. So very few tenants have legal representation, especially at their first hearing. We found that the tenants who did have legal representation, so the 7.7% of tenants we saw, we didn't see anyone get an eviction judgment granted against them if they had legal representation. We saw it was just as likely to get a dismissal or a future date set out. And for tenants who didn't have legal representation, it was much more likely that an eviction could happen about 30% of the time, and then sort of a mix of future dates or dismissals for the rest of the tenants. And we do have a little bit of an analysis of this. So we did find that the protections in place during the pandemic have been helpful. It's difficult because we don't have like a perfect data set from before the pandemic to compare to. I know that the Legal Aid Justice Center or maybe the RVA Eviction Lab are sort of working on that kind of data, but I think there's also a little bit of a misconception that during the pandemic, no one was getting evicted, or only, you know, a very few exceptional cases. But I do think it's worth mentioning that despite the protections in place, evictions were still happening. And as these protections begin to expire, you can expect that it'll be easier for landlords to file evictions, and likewise, there will be more hoops that tenants have to jump through in order to advocate for themselves. We did see that tenants were significantly less likely to be evicted with legal representation. And I know there are statistics about that outside of Charlottesville as well that tell a similar story. And then lastly, it's sort of an observation from our general anti-eviction work we've been doing in the pandemic. We've just found that like every piece of volunteer advice or legal support makes a huge difference. A lot of tenants will come to the courtroom not really knowing what their rights are. Sometimes they don't even know that they need to come to court. Or if they do know their rights, not necessarily having the language that the courtroom understands, not being able to translate their situation. And so it's just really helpful to get as much information to tenants as possible, and ideally have someone in the courtroom who, you know, speaks lawyer there as well. Yeah, and I see that Chantal dropped the Eviction Lab link as well, so thank you. Yeah, and I believe that's the end of the slides, so happy to take questions or go back to any previous slides.
Thank you. I mean, I've seen it now 2 days in a row, and I still think it's a fabulous presentation. Really appreciate it. Questions, comments? I can't see anybody now, so people just have to speak. Ah, there we go. Okay.
This is Emma. Thank you very much. That was really great information. I know we're focused on the legal representation. I think that's important, but I also wonder if there's a place for us to point out what not having access to the data means in terms of understanding what's happening from a human rights perspective. And that's not really a local issue. It's a state issue, but it is appalling I mean, it's shocking. People don't believe me when I tell them that you can't go to the court and get public information, even though it's all there in their computers, that they cannot pull the information out and tell us how many evictions happened, how many people were represented by counsel, just very basic facts about what should be public record. So that's a pet peeve.
Yeah, I similarly, I have practiced law in several states, including, the often maligned Alabama and Mississippi. And both of those states have an online database where you can search all cases through the entire state. And Virginia has nothing like that. And so I like to regularly point out that we are dramatically worse than Alabama and Mississippi in terms of transparency on these kinds of issues. And that's a sad place to find ourselves.
The clerks of the court themselves cannot pull this data. So just to be clear. So what the DSA has done here in providing this for us is extraordinarily helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do just want to add, like, I think there's a lot of this data is publicly accessible, but has to be individually pulled and compiled. And I know there are groups like the RVA Eviction Lab that are doing that in different areas. But a lot of things that we're able to observe in the courtroom are not public records. So how long a hearing goes, what the race and gender, language access, et cetera, all of that information for tenants and landlords, none of that is available publicly. So that's also worth noting.
Other questions? Thank you so much for coming and doing that presentation again. That was just super, super helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us to share and hopefully collaborate on this moving forward.
I will say, so I noted the numbers that you gave us because this was discussed in, I think, the last city council meeting. And I think it was Councilor Snook who said something about 34 evictions this year. I mean, it was a very low number that didn't seem probable and doesn't really match what you gave us.
My understanding, based on the conversation from last night at the budget meeting, because Councilor Snook spoke about that again, is that he was talking about trials, right? And so he was saying, well, it's, not that many people. We wouldn't have to have, it wouldn't cost that much because it would only be a few people. But there are just like, obviously we see like hundreds of people who are never able to successfully make it to the trial because the eviction judgment is issued earlier. So I think we weren't talking about the same numbers. That was my understanding. Emma, if you understood that differently, please speak up.
Yeah, I think you're right. So like most of what we see are default judgments when the tenant just is not present at the initial hearing to begin with. And I that was also my interpretation, is that that was sort of trial and judgments. I also think there may have been perhaps an issue of like whether it was evictions for non-payments or for other issues. And I do want to note that during the pandemic especially, a lot of states, and Virginia is no exception, have been seeing a number of sort of like pretextual evictions where landlords have a stated reason for evicting the tenant, even though the real reason is non-payment of rent. And that's sort of a little complicated for us to track on the data end, but obviously, we can't necessarily think it's worth noting that landlords have found creative ways to try and make evictions happen despite the protections that have been.
I think the data is appalling. That when they don't have representation, the outcomes It's sickening. Is it possible for you to share these slides with us collectively as a group?
Yes, I believe I shared sort of like a written version of this that includes the charts with Todd, and I'd be happy to share this slideshow as well.
I'm interested in, and I assume this housing committee will probably come to something like that, but I'm just wondering if down the road there isn't a way for our human rights or brochures to help people or steer them in the right direction in some fashion. I love putting more work on Todd. But he's updating the brochure, and I, under our housing, since this is, one of the things that we've decided we were going to be more concerned about, if there is a way for some sort of information on where people should go for various things, or anyway, I'm not on the housing committee, but I'm assuming maybe down the road, the housing committee is going to come up with some sort of things like that the Human Rights Commission and the office can in fact do.
Well, I think there are written materials that have been developed by groups like Legal Aid Justice Center to, explain tenants what their rights are. But what my understanding from the DSA presentation is that even when they were able to meet with people and help prepare them, people still did worse off without an attorney, right? Emma, I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit, just about, I remember you saying how people got flustered and even when you thought they were very well prepared, it still didn't go well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just comes down to the fact that a courtroom is really scary. This is like, one of the worst things that you can be going through is, potentially being removed from your home. And there's a lot on the line. And I think tenants will get nervous or maybe, not quite understand, like, for example, like a really common example is a landlord will take a tenant to court for a rent amount, and if the amount won't be quite correct, and the place to dispute that is in a trial. But if the tenant says, yes, I owe the rent, but it's a different amount, you said, yes, I owe the rent. That's the point at which judgment happens. So like, just kind of, there's just a lot of traps that you can fall into, simple mistakes if you're not a lawyer, like not primed for what happens. So yeah.
So Chantel and Tobia, is there, what would the housing committee like us to consider this evening?
Sure, yeah, we wanted to give folks some time to, I guess, absorb some of the information and be able to ask Emma some questions, because it's just so valuable to have her here. But yesterday when we also got the same presentation, and so Emma's here for a second day in a row, some of the things that we did discuss was just kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. So if we do go after trying to update our policy or city policy for evictions, what does that really mean for the programmatic side? So even if the policy does get passed, if people don't even know how to get that legal counsel, or there's not like a pipeline set up for it, that's not really doing any good. So we talked a little bit more about, I know that some counselors have been talking about what would it look like to just go ahead and put some money somewhere for legal counsels and things like that. In our public comment, we actually had Janice R, I'm forgetting her last name, but I know it starts with R, came and said, Redinger came and was talking about how city council was, exploring some ideas around setting some money aside for this type of work. And she was actually kind of advocating for us actually to submit something to council soon, like in this budget session, which I think the next one, if I'm getting the dates right, is April 5th. That's like the last one for public comment. So that was one area that the Housing Committee discussed that we wanted to talk with you all about it. If the Human Rights Commission as a whole wanted to go and draft a letter to City Council, kind of pushing them to support some type of funding like this. And we also wanted to talk a bit about what would it look like to advocate for this work beyond Charlottesville a little bit. So, and Mary could speak to this a little bit more, but we do have a really long list of partners. One of those partners is Jake Gold, and Sally out of Sally Hudson's office had reached out about doing this work because Virginia is a deal and rule state. So, you know, even if we do want to do a policy here locally, there may be some other hoops that we have to jump through. So that's kind of the long-term work, I think, about this policy. And the more immediate is if in the next couple of weeks in this budget cycle, we want to be pushing for City Council to fund something which they're already kind of talking about already.
One of the things I was struck by last night, thank you, Chantel, for that, was the City Council had what they called like a placeholder number that was like $100 and something thousand, $117,000. And one of the counselors suggested that that was really too much money. It wouldn't cost that much because there were only this handful of eviction trials. And I think we could play a really important role in bringing this data to council to show that I think that they misunderstand the need to focus only on the sort of last piece in the pipeline, which is like the people who get to trial should get a lawyer. But the point is, like, you should get a lawyer from the very beginning so you actually understand the process. One of the things that I have seen as a lawyer who used to do evictions was that sometimes people just move out, right? They just think it's over and they're going to move out. But it would be very useful to have a lawyer to just negotiate that with the landlord so there's not an eviction judgment on people's record, because that can have devastating consequences for years and years to come. And so I think that the council seemed inclined to want to do the right thing, but I think we could help frame that better and to really kind of make the case for what we think is actually needed.
So I have a question about sort of how the structure is. Do we have lawyers who are available to do this work and it's a matter of funding? What are some of the pieces that need to be put in place to make this work?
Council discussed that briefly and laid out, there was some discussion about whether this should be a city employee that gets hired. I think that seemed like it was kind of quickly rejected, and they fell back to more of an idea of like funding somebody else, like potentially the Legal Aid Justice Center or Central Virginia Legal Aid Society, or theoretically like somebody else. But I don't think that they came to any conclusion about that.
I think it's important to note too that, oftentimes I'll refer people to LAJC or CVLAS, and the truth is they get so many people doing intakes that they have to be, and Mary could probably speak to this as having worked there, but they have to be really selective as to what they take, just because they have limited time and capacity and staffing as well. And so there would have to be a change, an increase in available support at both of those nonprofit legal services organizations, but who knows what the realm of private attorneys who can do eviction cases is. I have no idea.
One other point that Janice Redinger made that I thought was very valuable was about the eviction of people from public and subsidized housing. And, for example, anyone being evicted from public housing, CRHA has its own lawyer, right? So there's always going to be a lawyer on that side. And the stakes for tenants when you're talking about being evicted from subsidized housing is so high because people have so much to lose. And I thought that Janice made that point really well.
So would it be useful for us, as you say, Mary, to go with the data that the DSA has pulled together and a brief explainer? Because I'm going to guess that most of the folks on City Council, or at least several of the folks on City Council, may not know exactly what the eviction process is. And then maybe we don't have the local stats, but we have national numbers. There's no reason to think they would be that different here about why this is particularly a human rights problem. Right.
LAJC, Elaine Poon at LAJC told me that they had pulled some data from the pre-pandemic year and that there were about, as I recall, 700 cases filed over the course of the year preceding the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think DSA presented to the budget to the City Council last night, and that was really helpful. But I think trying to gather all of this data and packaging it up could be we could play a helpful role there. And framing it as an issue of equity and racial justice. Right?
That's what I was just going to say. It's probably gender and race and maybe even disability. Right? We don't have those. I haven't seen anything local with that kind of information.
Are there a way to support tenants? I can imagine it's overwhelming just to go through this legal process by themselves. Are there like organizations that we can partner with to help get information out? Like, it's a lot of cases, 700 cases. And if people don't know that they can fight this or how to do it, like sometimes that's the biggest hurdle, is like not knowing, like I want to fight it, this is not right, but I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to surrender to what is happening to me, unfortunately. Like, are there ways that we can, in the meantime, as we're preparing this for council, like partner with other organizations that maybe have guides and like have language of like support and resources that they can have access to?
I was kind of looking at Emma to see if you had a
response
to that.
I wasn't sure whether we were now in just commission conversation, but yeah, I mean, so DSA has been doing, I mean, we're all volunteers and sort of have our own limitations in terms of capacity, but we've been trying to do a lot of that work. We have materials with Know Your Rights information. We've led a couple of tenant rights workshops, and we're pulling the names from the docket every week for people who have cases coming up the next week. Unfortunately, it's hard to get that data earlier than a week out, but we do try and do outreach to everyone in the week before their cases. And not everyone is home, as you know, one of the biggest difficulties. A lot of times, by the time you're a week out from the case, it's too late. People have left or self-evicted. But yeah, that is like the bulk of the work that we're doing right now.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that it's not happening. I mean, how can we further support this effort of what you're doing is kind of what I'm asking.
So I will also say that our sort of housing justice group is meeting next week, and we're definitely going to be talking about like ways that we can support this push for rights to represent, the right to counsel. And I think we're also going to try and sort of have an assessment of like needs and ways that we could partner in other ways when we discuss that next week. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Thanks, Emma. I also just wanted to throw this out there because I know that the Housing Commission talked about this a little bit, and you know, the number that Mary talked about, 700, is a lot, and there's no reason to think that the city shouldn't even start like piloting programs like this just to get a sense of what it actually means and would look like. You know, even if they were to fully fund something, those first couple years are always pilot years anyway for being able to understand the capacity that you need something. So we were kind of just kicking that around with being able to present this to council, and, you know, hopefully them thinking more seriously about it than just like tossing around as a conversation, but, you know, really kind of considering this as a potential to pilot some new like equitable work that we just don't have in Charlottesville. So we did talk about that a little bit as well. And the Housing Commission, not the commission, but our group also set another meeting for March 31st. So I think that could be an opportunity for us all to meet as a whole if we do say like, yeah, we would like to submit something to City Council and we need, you know, additional time to workshop it. I don't know if we need to like vote on it per se if Mary is sending it, but I'm just going to assume that maybe we might want to vote on it. And so we had set another meeting for March 31st ahead of the April 5th meeting to discuss if we have anything that comes out of this conversation.
Chantal, we did vote collectively, I think at the retreat, that this would be one of our priorities, but we could vote, I guess, on the specific actions that the Housing Committee's proposed. What would you suggest?
I'm throwing it out there. I'm happy. Like, I don't know. I know we voted on this. I just, you know, yeah.
Sorry. You mentioned that that the budgeting process at the city wasn't finished yet, and that there was monies that could be accessed. Was that their equity budget, or what were those funds, and do y'all have a sense of what we might ask for?
I think that Councilor Snook said that there was like $117,000 in the budget that they described as like a placeholder number. And I don't know where it came from, and I don't know what that represents, but he suggested that that might be too much money and that it should be perhaps cut down. And I do think that that was based on this understanding that it was a much smaller number of cases.
And Jenna, I don't know if Mary went to the meeting yesterday, so I don't know if that was the equity fund like reserved for city council, or if there were a general fund. Like, I don't know where that money is hiding.
Yeah, that's a good, I don't know specifically where that is. I mean, they said they had line item that for this potential program, but it had, you know, I don't know where those numbers came from, yeah, or where the money's coming from.
Sorry if this was already answered, but I know there was Catherine, you said there were 700 cases last year, so that's during COVID. I know a lot of organizations were like making sure that their tenants weren't being evicted. Do we have data on that?
You mean on how many people ended up getting evicted out of that?
Yeah, that even though they weren't supposed to, but that they still were.
What wasn't the 700 pre-COVID?
Yeah, the 700 was the number I got from LAJC about the year prior to COVID. What the absolute numbers were. Sorry, I should have closed the door to my.
So we don't have data for COVID. That's what you guys were saying earlier.
Well, Emma that's what Emma presented, was the COVID data. And people are still being evicted because landlords are going around. They can't be evicted for non-payment, but they can be evicted for other violations of the lease. And so landlords, it appears, are just getting super picky maybe about violations they might have overlooked before.
That, and you can be evicted for non-payment if the landlord has complied with all of the rules that currently that have gone through the legislature. So if you had the extended amount of time in terms of warning the tenant, if you've offered a payment plan, and if you've applied for rental relief. So landlords have more hoops to jump through, but they still are, I saw this at least two happen on Tuesday. People are getting evicted for non-payment still, so.
Thanks.
So I guess I'm still not clear, Chantel and Tobia, if if you would like the full commission to vote this evening on anything, or if we will just follow up with the next meeting on March 31st.
I am used to people telling me what I'm supposed to do in terms of voting for things and not voting for things. So,
I mean, I feel like we voted on this issue, right? And so that we were going to support this issue. But if we want to take specific action that we should vote on, I guess I'm not clear kind of what we are proposing in terms of like specific action.
I have to say I'm not clear either. It is not clear to me what is being asked from us tonight. This was a report, a presentation from a subcommittee, work, basically what we're, an ad hoc committee. I'm not really sure if you can vote on actions in a work session rather than in a regular business section. Anyway, I mean, I love what has been presented, but I haven't a clue what we're being asked to do as a commission.
Well,
Can I make a suggestion?
yes, you can.
It seems like because of where we are in the budget process and the fact that there is an item in the budget that directly pertains to this, wouldn't it make sense for us to be supporting the money that's currently the placeholder in the budget for whatever this pilot program is, and making sure that it doesn't get rolled back because of a lack of understanding of how many cases there actually are? And so wouldn't that just simply be us agreeing that you or somebody from the housing subcommittee go to the next session to say Human Rights Commission strongly supports this budget item?
I think yes, although I don't know that we want to concede that $117,000 is what the pilot would cost, because I don't think we know where that number came from at this point. So I think it'd be useful to kind of work briefly with the other organizations to identify kind of what a pilot would look like and what we think it would actually cost, because perhaps it's slightly more than that. But I think in general, like supporting that and providing the data, that we are able to provide to kind of justify that is kind of what I understood the committee was pushing the full commission to do.
We talked about figuring out how many hours an attorney would need for each eviction case to try to figure out what money is needed for the program. But I'm not sure how I mean, who we would talk to figure that out.
Is the understanding that the Legal Aid Justice Center would implement the connecting lawyers to individuals, or is that yet to be determined?
I think that's yet to be determined, although I certainly think they're working on that and are certainly open to being part of the solution. But I don't know that the council has made any kind of determination about what the pilot would look like.
The most I think we could do at this point would be to support in principle a pilot program to deal with the issue. I don't see how you can put any dollars into that. But I'm, you know, as crabby as I usually am, I could support a statement at council or a letter from the commission supporting the idea of a pilot program to deal with the important issue of not having legal representation for any number of people who might need it. That's about as far as I can go.
Thanks, Sue. I think, so with that, if that were the threshold, I'm not saying that's what we're gonna do, but would we need to vote on whatever that statement is? Either now, like we're saying that that's the action that we're gonna take as a commission, or at the March 31st Housing Commission meeting, if there is a quorum and we show up and there's enough folks there.
I mean, I'm glad for us to have a vote this evening that says that we are going to, you know, take whatever action we can to support council moving in this direction. And I don't know, maybe there will be some proposal that's beyond, you know, a small pilot. And I wouldn't want to limit us like from supporting something more ambitious if that were proposed to council. But I think supporting this kind of conceptually and trying to provide the data and information that they need to make a decision about what it would cost. I guess that's what I would propose.
Okay.
And that we frame it, you know, as a matter of racial and other justice.
I think that, you know, just to try to answer Chantel's question, if you can all come to a consensus that the chair can compose the letter based on the premise that she just talked about in terms of what the content of that letter would be. And if you just grant her that permission to write that in this meeting, then she can go forward. Then I think that authorizes the action and you don't have to worry about anybody questioning whether there was a transparent process, if that makes sense. Then you can move.
Mary, are you on the subcommittee?
I am. I'm on that. I'm not on the other subcommittee, but I was on the subcommittee.
I move to support the subcommittee's efforts towards advocating for representation for eviction cases through action of the board chair as the subcommittee deems necessary. Does that work?
That works great.
Second.
All right, so we can do thumbs up, but if we can also have people state orally what their vote is. All those in favor.
Do we want to do Todd have a roll call, or does that?
Well, actually, before we get there, was there any discussion? Sorry, I kind of preempted any discussion on the proposal.
This is actually what we, as Wolfgang so capably told us or put in the chat, this is exactly what we said at our retreat. Thank you, Wolfgang.
Todd, do we need a roll call for this?
you know, if you follow Martha's rules, you're basically declaring whether you're in favor, can live with it, or opposed. And if the majority is in favor, or can live with it, then you're good. If you want to have an official record, yeah, I should probably call it by roll, just because I can't, with the minutes, it's easy because everybody was unanimous, but this, I don't know, there may be some variation. So if you'd like, I can go through the line. Just sort of depends on how you want to handle it.
Well, we're using Martha's rule, so I suggest we do that unless it's unclear and we need to have a roll call. But all those in favor or who can live with it, say aye and/or raise your thumbs.
Aye.
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 I think I said aye.
All those opposed?
We're going back to Roberts now.
All right, thank you all. Thanks, and thanks so much for that report from the Housing Committee. Thanks, Chantel and Tabia. Is that all for kind of Housing Committee business and this evening?
Can I put one more plug in as I'm thinking about it? And I don't know if you want to include this in the ask for the legal representation for evictions, but I don't know if this would also lump in legal representation for people who file a complaint that is then authorized for investigation. I think that I don't want to let that get over, get forgotten, because I think it's really important, because we want to support the people that are actually coming to our office specifically. So there you go.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know whether it is like part of the same advocacy, right? Is it because there's not an obvious solution for how that's going to be done, right? Has that issue been asked of council previously?
I don't think so yet. It's been tossed around, but no ask has been made to my knowledge.
I have no objection to including that in our ask of council. I just don't think that we have like sort of developed as thoroughly kind of what that would look like and who would do that. But I think we can certainly reference that in our written document that we think this is also needed. All right, so now I think we are going to move on to have a report from the Accessibility Committee. And who is going to?
That's me.
All right.
Hi. So we met a couple weeks ago and outlined 5 priorities that came out of our conversation from the retreat. So Sue and I discussed this and came out that we want to finish the disability visibility project from this past spring. Todd accumulated all the notes, sent it to us. So thank you, Todd, for that. Our second strategic goal was to build back a better relationship with the ADA office now that a new coordinator has been hired for the position. They've been contacted and we're gonna hopefully set up a meeting if we can get through. Third goal was to reduce barriers for residents to communicate with the city, whether that's current remote meetings, future in-person meetings, either ASL interpretation or different language interpretation. And Todd has already reached out to the communications folks to see if we can inquire about adding captions and transcribing Zoom meetings. I'd be curious as to if you've heard back from them about that.
Not yet.
Okay, great, I'll just keep moving. Fourth goal, advocate for continued consideration of transportation and city infrastructure whether it be walkways or improvements to CAT and jaunt transportation. And then 5, just a general policy review of current procedures that impact accessibility. So, and also going on with that, like engagement, people to come to the HRC and share their concerns with us. So we met, we discussed. Any thoughts?
Thank you.
We're not asking you to do anything tonight.
So what are, Wolfgang, what would you describe as kind of next steps? And are there actions that you'd like the entire commission to take?
As Sue said, there's nothing for the commission to take at this point. We literally just sent out requesting meetings and we haven't heard back from anybody, which is kind of par from the course, I think, this commission's experience, but we're gonna keep on at them. We gotta like knock on some doors or like send some good old fashioned snail mail. I don't know. Keep on trying.
Okay, great.
Maybe
Questions?
one day soon we'll be able to show up in people's offices. Remember?
Those were amazing times.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the work of that committee. Are there any kind of questions, comments, or follow-up? All right, well, we look forward to hearing next month about how you've gotten all the meetings, and you know, we'll look forward to that.
Can I bring up one thing that's related to this?
Yes.
I was in the Residents for Respectful Research meeting with FAR today, and a resident brought up the fact that in the redevelopment process at Crescent Halls, they are going to be relocating the bus stop. And this, I thought this had a good sort of alignment with the accessibility committee, because right now the CAT bus stops right in front of Crescent Halls. If you're not familiar with Crescent Halls, it's the public housing high rise where mostly people with disabilities and seniors live. And right now the bus pulls right up to the front door. So anybody who has mobility challenges or anything like that has pretty easy access to and from the bus. During redevelopment, they're going to move the bus stop. Not exactly sure where, but not to as accessible a place. And the current thinking is that they'll just leave it there after redevelopment. And so the resident that brought that up was pretty adamant about how can we, and I was kind of hoping that they would come to tonight's meeting and present this in public comment, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because I think that the commission has the power to also bring this up to council to say, no, you know, people who have mobility challenges and who are, you know, very dependent upon this resource for groceries and doctor's appointments need to be assured that after redevelopment, they will still have access to public transportation. So I want to put that on your radar because I think that might go well with your committee work.
And do we know where the sense is that it's going to, that there will not be a change after redevelopment? Was that just a concern, or is that something that has been stated? I mean, it's a reasonable concern. I don't mean to.
Right. No, I believe that actually came from the director of CAT. And again, this is second, third hand information for me. So, but so it'd be good to do some research on that. But that was, from what I understood, that was the case. Is this was a decision at the level of CAT director.
Is that something the accessibility committee is kind of willing to look at?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was part of our conversation. And we wanted to, it was part of the thing we wanted to ask the ADA coordinators, their conversations and their priorities, talking to both CAT and Jaunt so that we could support their work and their priorities. And so that's definitely something we have on our radar. It's good to know that there's you know, something that we can apply directly to community members' experiences right now. So thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, I think next on our agenda is matters by the public. We do have a couple attendees. If anybody would like to make a public comment, you can raise your hand button. And for anyone who's attending by phone, use *9. We'd
And
love to hear
Smith
from the
has raised
public.
I'm going to go ahead and give Ann a chance to speak, former commissioner. Give me a second. Only takes a second. Oh, I think you may have permission to talk. Ann, you're on.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to state how concerned I was at the time when the city council with one person made this decision to change all the work that we had gone through in the past. But I see that you're all on top of it, so keep pushing for it. And then another thing I'd like to share with you is that if I am not mistaken, I used to go by Crescent Hall mostly every day when I was still at the Adult Learning Center before COVID. And there is actually a bus stop when you turn off of Monticello Road to head down 2nd Street. Now, whether they're gonna say, okay, you got that bus stop there, you don't need another one or not, but that would be very inconvenient for some of those residents. So I truly hope that you will press forward with that to make sure that it's convenient for those who have a mobility issue, because going up that hill, it's a slight incline, but it's still a hill for a lot of people with mobility issues, that you follow up on it and make sure that everybody knows that you're on top of it and you're going to make sure that nothing happens. And again, I'm glad to see all of you and keep on working hard.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for staying interested.
We'll get to commission response in just a moment. I just want to make sure that there's no one else who would like to speak from the public. All right. Do commissioners have response to the comment from Ms. Smith? Appreciate your comments. And we certainly will follow up.
I would like to add something that the food justice, through Cultivate Charlottesville Food Justice Network, we're working with each of the departments on their food equity goals, and one is with transportation. And so we can add this to the conversation that we have about transportation with them as well. It's very aligned with that.
Great. All right. Commissioner updates. Do we have any updates from commissioners?
Yeah, I'm still working with VAHR. We're updating the bylaws and changing the way they get together, the various commissions that are in the VAHR get together. And you'll be hearing more about that as soon as we figure out exactly what we're doing.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Any other commissioner updates? All right, so next on our agenda is next steps. I do think we've identified a number of next steps as we've gone through the meeting, but here's an opportunity to talk sort of more generally about any other next steps that we want to pursue. I'll just identify the follow-up that we've kind of agreed to. You know, we have agreed to follow up with City Council about several matters, and I know that the Accessibility Committee is going to follow up with the with the meetings that they have requested. Are there other next steps that folks want to discuss? All right. Ernest, I can't tell you, are you raising your hand? Or you?
Yes, I was
Yeah,
asking,
great.
are we supporting the March 31st meeting for the housing meeting, March 31st? Do you have a time for that meeting, or will that be coming in a email?
I was just looking at, you guys can't tell, but I'm looking at Chantel and Tivia as the chairs of that committee. We do have a time for that committee, right?
Yeah, it's 6 p.m. And
Okay.
yeah, I think everybody should attend if you're free.
Okay. I'm just, are you looking for commission support? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Right now it's me to be Mary holding it down. So
That is because we have 3 commissioners on that. That's actually a publicly noticed meeting. And so the agenda will be posted, and it will be, I mean, not that you guys aren't welcome to any committee meeting, but that will be
right.
Publicly noticed, and you know, there will be opportunities for the public to be able to speak as well.
Okay.
And just to note, because it's my job to pay attention to these things, I have to still get permission and confirmation that we got support for that date. But you can assume that we probably will, just based on what Brian has told us recently, that they're pretty willing to support us to get work done. So
I'd like to extend my gratitude to the subcommittees for all the work they did this past month.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks to all the good work that's going on. All right, if there are no other next steps, I think that means we are ready to adjourn. Thank you all. I'm sorry, I struggled through Martha's rules. I don't think, do we have to vote on whether we're adjourned? Or?
No.
That is good. Okay, well, it was just wonderful to spend the last, hour and 45 minutes with you all. And I look forward to maybe someday seeing you all in person. I think that will be wonderful. And just keep doing the good work. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Appreciate you all. Bye.
Thanks.